We are talking about the paradox of an infinite God. And I need to, again, let me clarify, it's a paradox because we're finite. Not because he's intentionally confusing. The problem is not with him, the problem is with us. Our brains are too small. There was a t-shirt years ago that I really, really wanted to buy, and I never got the opportunity to buy. But it said, if God were small enough to fit in your mind, he wouldn't be big enough to handle your problems. Then on the back it said, 2 things in this life are sure. 1, there is a God. 2, you're not him. I love that shirt. I'm actually going to make that shirt. So we're talking about the paradoxes of an infinite God. And last week we started, a couple weeks ago, we talked about knowing the unknowable. Last week we talked about strength from weakness. And last week we only hit the first part of that, strength gone wrong. We talked about King Nebuchadnezzar and how this man had everything. Everything. His empire spanned from Europe all the way into Asia, from as far north as Afghanistan all the way down to the Indian Ocean. This man, all he had to do was say it, it was his. As a matter of fact, we have a record of him saying, hey, you know what, we're going to wipe out an entire group of people on this day. And it was law. On that day, the entire empire were going to attack and wipe out the Jewish nation scattered amongst them. God intervened through Hadassah, Queen Esther, and his mind was changed. He was convinced of his error, and he then, because the way their laws were written, once he wrote a law, he couldn't undo it. So he wrote another law saying, oh yeah, these people can defend themselves. Does anybody know what day that's celebrated on in the Hebrew calendar? What that feast is called?
Purim, isn't it?
Purim. Yeah. Yeah. The Jews annihilated all of those that were sent out after them. Okay? So, he had everything. They went through when he put aside Queen Vashti for her offense. All the wise men went through all the empire and found all the beautiful women and ran them up. They had to go through months of grooming and training and perfuming and oiling. Like 6 months worth before they were even brought into his presence. And they bring him into his presence and he goes, nah. Really, guys, this is the best you can do, you know. And he just picks and chooses. I think she'll work. Okay. So anything he wanted was his. Now, we looked last week. I'm just going to hit this real quick. He knew about the God of the Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember, thrown in the fiery furnace at his command. He goes, hey, wait, how many did we put in there? I'm not up to this new math. We threw 3 in and there's 4 there. And he calls them out. And he says, nobody is allowed to speak offense against their God on pain of death. Okay? But he didn't acknowledge him. He didn't worship him. So then later he comes in and he has a dream. He has a vision. And what does this mean? So the prophet Daniel comes into his presence. And he's like, okay, tell me what your vision was. All right, well, okay, here's the vision, And then he goes, oh, that's not good. Well, king, so don't be afraid, Daniel, tell me what it is. Well, God's going to smite you. He's going to make you like an animal. You're going to go out of your mind. And a certain amount of time is going to pass, and at the end of the time, you will acknowledge him as God. All right, good enough, fair enough, we're good. Short time later, what's Nebuchadnezzar doing? He knew God, he'd been warned, he's walking around on the palace top, and he's looking out over his kingdom going, yeah, I am the bomb. Blam, he blew up. He was driven out from amongst men, ate the field, the grass of the field, His hair got like feathers. I don't know what that means. His nails grew like claws, and he acted as a beast of the field. Until at the end of the time, he looked up to heaven, and he acknowledged God. And that everything that he had came from him. Okay? Strength gone wrong. Look what I've got. Hey, Nebby, you know, you ain't got nothing but what God gave you. Yeah. Man, I'm the cheese. I'm the bomb. I'm it. Okay? So strength gone wrong. Today we're going to look at weakness done right. Weakness done right. We're going to flip over to 1 Samuel 17. Just give you a little very brief history lesson. We're going to be talking about the Philistines. And the Philistines are kind of an interesting group of people because they lived on the coast, and they were actually believed to be a colony of Phoenicia. What made them unique was they had access and understanding how to manipulate iron. And this put them above all of the people around them because all of the people around them were still using weaker metals. Okay? Like bronze. And they were a very mighty people. They were very strong. Now, the place that they were in, unfortunately, bordered right up against Israel, and so there was constant warfare going back and forth. And, you know, we're going to talk about David and Goliath. Goliath was a big dude. Okay? Now, one time, Christy and I, as a youth thing, we made a paper Goliath. We measured him out, and we took computer paper and we measured it out. It comes out to be about 9 foot 6 inches. Give or take. I mean, at that big, who cares? You know? I mean, I look at people that are like 6'4", and I go, whoa. 9 foot 6 inches? I don't care if it's off by, you know, half a foot or so. He was big. And we start, you know, the backdrop. Saul is king. The Philistines invade. They draw up their battle lines. And before the battle is engaged, out comes Goliath. And he starts boasting and bragging, and he challenges. He says, hey, send your best warrior out to fight me. There's no need for the whole armies to come together. Let's do it one-on-one. Man to midget. Bring it. And we'll see whose God is mighty. Uh-oh. Now see, I don't really know what God was thinking at that time. But I know when he challenged the God of the Israelites, the one true God, God took note. God paid attention. And so the entire army of Israel camps out there. All right? And they're out there for a long time. I mean, they're out there for a month. And every day this guy's coming out and saying, hey, come on. Come on, you Israelites. What you got? Now keep in mind, King Saul was a big man himself. Head and shoulders above all of the other men of Israel. So he's a big man. Where was Saul? He's in his tent. So, we're going to start on the story. We're going to pick up, let's see, let's pick up, let's start in verse 24. Now David is the youngest son of Jesse. He has 3 older brothers that are in the army for Israel. And his father calls him one day and says, hey, I want you to take some supplies to your brother and to the king and to the king's army on my behalf. Take them down and go deliver them. And David, being a good son, says, okay, Dad, sure. So he loads up the supplies and he brings them down. Now this kind of cracks me up because this shows so perfectly how siblings interact. So David is in the camp. I'm actually going to back up a little bit. I'm going to go to verse 20. It says, and David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper and took the provisions and went, as Jesse had commanded him, doing what his father said. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. These guys are pumped. All right? They're psyching each other up. Now, the closest thing we have today is the football team. You don't really see it too much in professional sports, but you watch the college games, and these guys are all out, and they do weird noises and stuff, and it works because it's all testosterone driven, and they get all pumped up, and there's this whole army getting each other pumped up. Okay, so they're pumped. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. Yeah, I was smart. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistine and spoke the same words as before. Flip back. I'm just going to jump back to verse 8. You don't need to go there. This is what he said. Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together. Okay? So, he's given his line. 40 days that he's done this now. 40 days. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. So much for being pumped up. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away this reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You see the focus here? Where's David's focus? David's focus isn't on the house of Saul or the riches or the rewards. His focus is on the insult done to God. And the people answered him in the same way, so shall it be done to the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. Doesn't that sound like an older brother? Hey kid, don't you have better things to do? Go home. You're being irresponsible. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. You ever get that? You ever get that in your Christian walk? Hey, what are you doing? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. What are you about? Don't you have other things you're supposed to do? Important things. Sheep need looking after. Why was David there? Why was David there? His father sent him. Dad, who do you think ranks? Jesse or Eliab? Yeah, I think Jesse ranks. So, and David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? I'm just talking. What, can I even say anything? God. You get that? The whole interaction here. You know? Nobody's ever heard this in their house, right? And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before. You see what he did? Can I even talk? Hey, what's going on over here? And he brother, sibling right for you, right here. Okay? You catch that? That whole interaction there. This is nothing new. When the words that David spoke were heard, and they were repeated before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." Kid's got some spunk. Now, I'm not a hunter. I hunt for good deals on steak. That's about it. Okay? But I don't know many people that take down bears and lions by grabbing them by the beard. Right? That's some serious action there. You know, this is like the first action hero that we got going on here. He grabs him by the beard. Okay? And then he says, "I'll treat him like one of them." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." You guys see how much faith Saul is exhibiting right here? Because what happens if David loses?
They become servants to the Philistines.
They become servants to the Philistines. That's the arrangement. One-on-one, whoever wins, the loser's people become their servants. And so Saul tells David, go. Go and do this thing. Now either Saul is the greatest fool or is exhibiting a tremendous amount of faith. And I'm not sure Saul really knows which he is at this point. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." So David put them off. You ever try to use contemporary armor that's not suited for you? You know what contemporary armor is? The modern day philosophy or the current psychology or the best self-help book that's out there. These things that are not tested and we jump on the bandwagon because Oprah tells us they're good or Dr. So-and-so endorses them. But what's the tested, tried and true armor that we have? Right here. Front to back. Tested, tried and true. One size fits all. Okay? So he tries to put on the armor, can't do it, so he takes them off. Then he took up his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. "Sticks and stones may break my bones." And the Philistine's going to call him names. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David, and with the shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. He's talking smack. You can imagine how offended Goliath has to be. 40 days he's come out and issued this challenge, and he's looking at the mighty men of Israel standing over there, and he comes out and issues the challenge, and they turn tail and run. And out from the tents comes a boy, not even dressed for battle. Comes with a staff and a sling. Seriously? This is, you're gonna, you. Me? Can you picture this? I mean, that's like, one of those kids, one of your sons, coming out after me. Come on, Mr. Vandal, bring it! Really, Nolan? You? Me? He'd pick up a rock and hit me in the head with it. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. What gods? The god of rock? The god of stone? Wood? His curses have no validity. There's no power. There's no authority because there's nothing to back them up. He's blowing smoke. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with the sword, with the spear, and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Who's better armed? Who's better armed?
Israel or David.
Look at this. Revelation, we read that by the word of his mouth he will slay armies. The word of his mouth he will slay armies. God wiped out the entire army of Egypt with water. You think the Philistines going to be a problem? When you come to battle, you come properly armed. Okay? You don't go to a gunfight with a pocket knife. The Philistine has a pocket knife. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth. You got to think at this point, Goliath's thinking, he's trying to one-up me? Really? He's not only, he's going to get me, he's going to get all my buddies too. That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. That there is a God in Israel. Remember those curses that he was uttering? You got nothing. Because the God is here. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. Man, he's got faith. Wow, he's got faith. Not only does he walk out unarmed before a giant, not only does he not allow him to talk smack about the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, but he rushes into battle. He's going at him. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut his head off with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. This is one of the great stories that we tell our kids. David and Goliath. You ask any kids over in Sunday school, they'll be able to give you a clue about David and Goliath. Why do we relegate it to a childhood story? Because David came in weakness. By all appearances, he had no business even being on the battle line. Much less talking smack. Much less challenging the warriors of Israel. Much less addressing himself before the king. Much less going out and standing before a giant trained from his youth in the art of war. He had no business doing this. He's just a kid. First Corinthians tells us, chapter 1, that God chooses the weak things to shame the strong. He chooses the weak things to shame the strong. David knew where his strength was. It wasn't here. Okay? It wasn't in the sword and shield. It wasn't in the spear and javelin. It wasn't in the bronze helmet that the king had offered to him. His strength came from his faith in the Almighty Creator, the Almighty God of Israel. His faith was placed in something beyond himself, something transcendent, something above what any human could do. David existed in a place of strength because of whom he believed. A couple points I want to point out in this story. Number 1, verse 33, and Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against a Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father." He goes on to explain. See, David knew who he was. He didn't need people to explain to him who he was. He didn't need people showing him the odds. David knew who he was. See, that's relevant to us because you need to know who you are. Number 2, verse 26. And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" He didn't care who Goliath was. You see the dichotomy here? The people of Israel, the warriors of Israel, they weren't altogether sure who they were, and they were overly convinced of who Goliath was. He's huge. He's big. Look at the size of that shield. Look, his spear. It's enormous. Because of who they thought he was, they weren't altogether sure who they were. Their eyes were fixed on the circumstances. They weren't fixed on the God who transcends the circumstances. He didn't care. David did not care who Goliath was. Yeah, I see him. So what? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Number 3, in verse 45, this is the verbal sparring with the Philistine. It says, "You come at me with your weapons, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head." A little further down he says, "That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." David knew who God was. He was firmly convinced in his mind, in his heart, who God was. That God was bigger than the circumstances. That God was not bothered by how tall and how broad this Philistine was. That God was not impressed with the size of his spear or the weight of his shield. See, David's offense was not for himself. David's offense was for God. Because Goliath was insulting God. David was justifiably offended. So, he knew who he was. He didn't care who Goliath was. He knew and trusted who God was. Final point about David. I'm going to jump over to verse 49. It says, "He took the rock out of the bag, struck the Philistine on the forehead. David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. And there was no sword in his hand." If we go down a little bit further, we see that David interacts with Saul after the battle is done. David was glorified because of what he did. David received honor because of his faith. Flip with me, if you will, over to Hebrews. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 11. Can anybody identify that chapter for me? It's the Hall of Faith. And the writer of Hebrews is talking about all these great men and women of faith. In verse 32, he says, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. See, we tend to look at David as being a mighty man. But he wasn't mighty because of himself. He was a mighty man because in his weakness God made him strong. God gave him strength. God encouraged him and strengthened his own weakness. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, I'm going to turn there real quick. I want to share with you one more story. 2 Corinthians in chapter 11, Paul is defending himself against the so-called super apostles. The men who had it all and wanted more. And they boasted in what they had done and what they were doing. And I'm not going to touch very much on chapter 11. If you want to see something worth boasting about, read chapter 11, the last half of it, starting in verse 16. In verse 29 of chapter 11, Paul is summarizing, he's bringing his thoughts together. He says, who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to fall, and I am not indignant? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. Okay, so he's just listed off here all of the abuse, the torture, the sufferings that he has had. And he's boasting. We get into verse 12, or chapter 12. And now he kind of turns the corner here. 12:1, I must go on boasting, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. Do you guys know what the third heaven is? Yeah, it's where, in the Jewish thinking, there were three heavens. Okay, there is the first heaven, which is kind of the air around us, the atmosphere, like up where the birds fly. Okay, that's the first heaven. The second heaven is where the stars reside. Okay, that's the physical place of the stars. The third heaven is where God resides. Okay, that's the penultimate heaven. So when he says the third heaven, he's saying I was caught up to where God is. Okay? Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into paradise. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard many things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. On behalf of this man I will boast, but on my own behalf I will not boast except in my weakness. Though if I should boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain from it, so no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. So to keep him from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh. Okay, so you get who the man was who was caught up? Yeah, it was Paul. He's referring to himself. Okay? And he says, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. You catch that? To keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is another one of the paradoxes of Christianity. Because see, when you exist in your own strength, God can't use you. Because you're doing it all yourself. when you exist in your weakness, when you get yourself out of the way, then God can use you. Why did God choose Israel to be His chosen people? I mean, think about it. At this time, we had the ancient Egyptians, the Sumerians. We had mighty cultures. And He chose Israel. Why did He choose them?
They were small and weak.
They were the smallest. They were weak. He didn't need somebody that people could look at and go, oh, they did that because they got the biggest army. You see how many chariots they got? You see how much wealth that nation has? Of course they could do that. He chose the weakest, that through them He might show His splendor, His strength. God chooses us because of our weakness. If you want to be used of God, put aside your strength, humble yourself before Him, and allow Him to use you. Look at the testimony of Paul. Man received visions from God. The man's hanky healed people. The man founded and established more churches than just about any other apostle. If anyone had a right to boast in his strength, it would have been Paul. Look what I have done. But what does he choose to boast in? I have been beaten. I have been scourged. I have been chased out of towns. I have been stoned. I have been left for dead. I have been shipwrecked. Makes you understand when Paul says, I want to know Him not only in the glory of His resurrection, but also in the fellowship of His suffering, that I might somehow attain the glory of His resurrection. Okay, we only want the glory of the resurrection part. Personally, I don't go out of my way to get in the front of throwing stones. Oh, yeah, there it is. I try not to. They hurt. Okay? But we spend so much time dodging stones that we become useless in the hands of God. We spend our time caught up in our strengths and abilities, and He can't use us. We're not pliable. We're not moldable. See, in order to be of use to God, you have to become weak, that through you His strength may flow. It's a paradox. We don't understand that because that's not the way this world works. You know, this world works on might makes right. We do it because I say we do it. And if we don't, I kick your butt. How's that? We do it because I say we do it. And if we don't, I repossess your house. How's that? God says, no, 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 no. That's not my economy. That's not the way I do things. Are you willing to forego your strengths to know what true power is? Are you willing to give up your might to be used of God? Are you willing to turn the picture upside down and glory in your weakness rather than your strength? You see, that's what it takes to be used of God. It's not enough to go, oh, I'd like to do this and I'd like to do that. Get out of the way so He can let you do that. So He can work through you to accomplish that.